Hey everybody, it's GauntletX, and welcome to the October 2023 Arena Open Day 1 event. This is going to be another Wilds of Eldraine Best of 1 sealed event, and we'll be competing to gain entry into the Arena Open Day 2, which will be Best of 3 draft with potential cash prizes on the line. This event costs 5,000 gems or 25,000 gold, and the only way to get your 5,000 gems back is to get a full 7-win run, so it is quite a high-stakes event. Today's video is going to be post-commentary, as that lets me jam out these Day 1 sealed events a little faster, but without further ado, let's bust open these packs and show off the sealed pool we've opened today. Alright, and with that really weird audio out of the way, it does seem like I accidentally double recorded audio. I was messing with settings a little bit in OBS again, and every time that happens, I accidentally blow something up, but I'll have it fixed for tomorrow. Without further ado, here's a look at the rares we've opened up. Talion's Messenger, Horned Lockwhale, Werefox Bodyguard, Questing Druid, Likeness Looter, Rest in Peace, and the Iron Crag. So, Rest in Peace and the Iron Crag are just not the greatest in this format, but the Horned Lockwhale, being a removal spell and a big flash creature late in the game, is super nice. The Talion's Messenger, being able to be a card draw engine that also buffs itself up over and over and over again, even if you don't have other fairies, is also a pretty impressive card. Werefox Bodyguard, very similar to the Lockwhale, being a removal spell and a creature all in one, is great. And Questing Druid can be a decent card draw alongside a decent little dorky body there. So decent stuff out of the rares. Really like the blue rares quite a bit. My favorite rare is the Werefox Bodyguard, but we've got two really powerful blue rares that can lead us in that direction. There's also a Likeness Looter, which is pretty cool, but obviously pretty narrow, being a blue-black gold card that's also a 2-mana spell, so it's not really super splashable. It's the kind of card that we'll just play if we end up in blue-black. Not a massive reason to be there, though, so decent rares for the sealed pool. But we'll have to see what we've got in terms of commons and uncommons in all of our colors here. So here I am now taking a quick glance through the sealed pool, seeing if I recognize any super powerful cards, just at a cursory glance here. But as soon as I am done scrolling through all the colors a little bit here, we do go ahead and take a look at each individually using the buttons at the top of the deck builder here. Really nice thing that they've put in for us drafters and sealed players in the deck builder. So if you click at these buttons on the top, you can see your multicolored cards there. That's going to show us our build arounds. Then we look at the colorless cards. That is what I recommend doing at the start of basically every sealed pool, and then looking at all of your colors individually, so you can weight certain color pairs a little bit in your head if there's a reason to be there. So for our multicolored, one Likeness Looter and one Ruby. Gonna be good if we're in the color pair, not a huge reason to get there. Double Greta, though, is pretty tempting towards green-black, so that's pretty solid. Looking at the colorless, the most important thing we're looking at here is how much mana fixing we have that can fit into any deck. That'll show us how splashy we can get if we have a particularly good rare we want to splash into a specific 2-color deck, just to add a little more power to the deck, or if we're in a 2-color pair that really lacks removal, maybe if we have enough fixing we can help support the deck by splashing in some off-color removal. So we do have 2 Crystal Grotto and a Collector's Vault for colorless fixing, and that is about it, but it's pretty decent. Taking a look at the green now, there is not a lot here. There is a Hamlet Glutton at the top of the curve, which is fantastic. It's really good at stabilizing you. You can get that cost reduction with its bargain ability to make it a 5-mana 6/6 that gains 3, which is massive. But outside of the Hamlet Glutton, there's really not a lot. There's some very filler creatures like Troublemaker Oof, Tempest Heart, and Beanstalk Worm. Toadstool Admirer pretty much always gets cut. There's a few combat tricks with 3 Titanic Growth. Those are fine, but not a reason to be in green. There's 2 Spider Food, which is just not quite main deckable in my opinion. And I think our best green card is Questing Druid, which has that off-color red adventure to draw us extra cards, which means it's more of a red-green hybrid card than an actual just green card. So green not looking very impressive out of the sealed pool. Then for red, we have 2 Torch the Tower, a Stone Splitter Bolt, 2 Flick a Coin, and a Frantic Firebolt for removal spells. That immediately makes red a pretty impressive color. The issue with our red here is that one of the strongest things to do with red in the format is to play a really streamlined, aggressive deck. There's plenty really powerful 1 and 2 mana creatures in red as a color, but we have opened up literally 0 1 or 2 mana red creatures. That is the huge flaw with our red as a color, but all that great removal, the double torch, the stone splitter, the double flick a coin, the firebolt, does have me pretty interested in the color. Not only that, we have an Imidane's Recruiter, which is one of the best uncommons in the format, especially with a little bit of fixing to splash in the trained troops. The Recruiter, again, because our lack of 1 and 2 mana cards is really going to need that trained troops to be impressive here, since we don't have the early aggressive creatures to get it to follow through with that extra damage, but if we can splash in trained troops to whatever deck we're playing, this is going to be 3 2/2s off of just 1 card, which is still pretty great value. Also, having a Grabby Giant and Red Cap Thief is really going to help randomly splash in that trained troops, so I'm a pretty big fan of having those in the color. Red is looking pretty good here, but only for something more defensive, more controlling, because of the lack of those aggro creatures. Taking a look at our black now, this is one of our more consistent looking colors, but there's nothing very exciting. Hopping us into the color, there's like a Sewer Witch that's pretty good, but we don't have a ton of rat production, and then there's just some stuff throughout the curve. There's 0 removal, which is a rarity in black. That's the big flaw of the color, but it looks like a fine, mediocre, dirtly color to pair with anything if we just need a quantity of just random playables like Sweet Tooth Witch, Conceited Witch, Minstrosity, Fairy Dream Thief, just a little bit of stuff throughout the curve for playables. Certainly not a very exciting color. And then looking at our blue, this does look pretty exciting because we have the Archive Dragon and Horned Lockwhale at the top of the curve. The Horned Lockwhale, of course, being a pretty big bomb, being a removal spell and a 6/6 all-in-one, but the Archive Dragon, just a gigantic 4/6 flyer with ward, hard for your opponent to kill it immediately, and it scries you a bit to set up your draws, try to get you nice and stable. It's a pretty great way to stabilize, so big fan of the Archive Dragon. We've also got good interaction here with Johan's Stopgap, Vantress Transmuter, Diminisher Witch, all of these little like cursed rolls and bounce spells. We also have 1 counter spell with Ice Out, and if we can get enough bargain, Hatching Plans becomes an insanely efficient draw spell. 2 mana to draw 3, the issue being that you have to bargain it away. So blue is looking pretty great, but pretty narrow here. Definitely a very slow, very controlling color. And you can see immediately I look right back to the red there. I'm like, well, we had double torch the tower Stone Splitter Bolt to bargain with the Hatching Plans, and our red also is only going to work more controlling. So you can see the gears turning in my head there of immediately just like, wait a second. That's 2 slow, dirtily controlling colors we can slap together and have a decent amount of synergy in the deck. Not really where I want to be in red as a color, but I think because our blue is really good at doing this controlling stuff, there's a good amount of card draw in the color. The blue is really exciting, and the blue's really excited to see how slow and controlling our red is, where it's just a bunch of burn mainly. So that is immediately what I hop on and start building. This is before I think I even looked at white individually. I did have that cursory glance through it, and I did not feel that we had a lot of decent commons and uncommons in the color. We had our 1 good rare, but our curve was just not great, and we didn't have a lot of creatures to follow up with the Werefox there. So I don't remember if I do a full-on look at white after I take this glance here, or if I just immediately slam in on blue-red. Oh, there we go. I do at least take a peek here. So we have Light Blades, we have a Hopeful Vigil, but that's really it in the color. I mean, I'll give you another look here. We have the Shrouded Shepherd and Unassuming Sage for just a couple random 2-drops. We've got a Cursed Courtier, which isn't great unless you can replace the roll token. Yeah, there's like no interaction, no removal in the color outside of 1 Kellen's Light Blades. White looks fine. I'm sure you could build some kind of white deck here, but I was very, very happy to see this blue-red controlling pile, and I think here is where I'm looking for random off-color interaction that we might want to splash in, or off-color bombs, because we know that we have the double Crystal Grotto. We've got 2 Flick-a-Coin, a Red Cap Thief, and a Grabby Giant for 4 treasure producers, so I'm looking around for maybe some more bargain for the Hatching Plans, or just some more removal or bombs or anything like that. looking at the whole sealed pool. Throw in that Collector's Vault, throw in the Crystal Grottos. As you can see, I'm obviously considering the splash here. Didn't realize I had 2 Crystal Grottos, so I only threw 1 in. So that's an MLG move right there. That's how you keep them guessing. We do take a peek at Questing Druid here, which is interesting. Because of the Seek the Beast adventure, we know that at worst, Questing Druid is going to be a 2-mana instant that we can cast to exile the top 2 cards of our library, and until our next end step, we can play those cards. So it is kind of like a reckless impulse because we can just cast it at instant speed during our opponent's turn, then untap our lands, and then spend all our mana on whatever we exiled off of it. So I am pretty interested in potentially just running that as more card draw here, because with a ton of great 1-for-1 removal spells like Torch the Towers and Stone Splitter Bolts, Frantic Firebolt as well, Ice Out is a 1-for-1 counter spell. If we can use a bunch of decent card draw to get ahead in card advantage while we keep trading off 1-for-1s, we can grind out a long game well that way. If we just use card draw to always be ahead in cards and have enough cards to trade 1-for-1 with their stuff, we just run them out of things and then beat them down with 1 or 2 cards that we have left over when the dust settles. So that's the idea there. And I do go ahead and put in the Questing Druid just as card draw mainly, not even really trying to cast the second half, but because we already have the really powerful white adventure on the Imidane's Recruiter, we're still going to run the Crystal Grottos and all this treasure production, so randomly we can cast the Questing Druid as well. And I do consider the Tempest Heart here for the draw 2, discard 2, because we know that we'll always have access to that off of the blue mana, and then maybe we use treasures or Crystal Grottos to cast the Tempest Heart. But in the end, I decide to cut it here. As you can see, it takes me a while, but I do decide to cut it in the end for a Collector's Vault. Because I feel like the Collector's Vault is really good at digging through the deck, even if we don't need those treasure tokens. It can dig towards our powerful bombs like Archive Dragon, Horned Lock, Whale, that kind of stuff, and it digs us out of some mana flood. But that Tempest Heart there, draw 2, discard 2, it puts you down a card when you play it if you don't get to cast the Tempest Heart later. And that does it for the deck building today. And that was about 3.5, maybe 4 minutes of deck building. If I did not pause this video at all, that's how much it was in real time. And that's what I mean when I say that today's video is post commentary, so that I could jam out as many Arena Open Day 1 attempts as possible. Because just when I'm trying to explain all the things that I can, it does slow things down a lot during deck building and a bit during gameplay as well. So in the interest of jamming out as many Arena Open Day 1 attempts as possible in the limited time that I have, I think I am going to keep doing post-commentary for the Day 1 event, but we will be doing live commentary in any Day 2 drafts that we manage to get into. So here's a look at the completed deck list for today. A very, very interesting one. A super slow, super controlling deck. Not the kind of deck that I would choose to draft or play, because I am not super great at these kind of archetypes. But I do believe that this is the best deck that we had access to in this sealed pool. We've got that Hatching Plans we can bargain away to draw 3, and this color pair gives us 2 Torch the Tower, a Stone Splitter Bolt, a Johann Stopgap, and an Ice Out to bargain that away. By playing blue, we get the strongest bombs in our sealed pool, a Horned Lock Whale, a Talion's Messenger, and to a certain extent, an Archive Dragon. Our red pairs exceptionally well with the blue, where both of these colors are doing a great controlling job. Blue with the counterspell, the bounce spells, the cursed rolls from Vantress Transmuter and Diminisher Witch, and red, of course, with all of this really efficient burn with double Torch the Tower, Stone Splitter Bolt, Frantic Firebolt, double Flick a Coin. We've got a lot of card draw in this deck as well to stay ahead in cards while we're trading 1-for-1 removal spells off. We have the Hatching Plans, of course, but also a Witch's Mark, a Quick Study, a Seek the Beast from Questing Druid. That's why there's a random green card in here. We don't ever need to cast Questing Druid for the card to be okay in this deck, giving us that draw 2. And we also have 2 Crystal Grottos and a bunch of treasure tokens to randomly cast the Questing Druid itself, as well as the train troops off of the Imidane's Recruiter. So pretty interesting, very grindy deck today. Certainly not what I would want to play if I had my personal choice, but again, Sealed and Draft are a lot about going where the cards take you. If your best, most synergistic deck with your most powerful cards is going to be a blue-red control deck, even if you're not super good at playing blue-red control, which I think I'm very bad at, I think it's still where you should probably end up, and that is where we have ended up today. So without further ado, let's head into the gameplay and see how it does. Here we are for game one with a Snap Keep. Little high on mana here, but that's not a huge deal in Sealed. It tends to be slower. We're not expecting to get immediately aggroed out. So our opponent starts with a Root Rider Fawn, and I go ahead and start with just getting the treasure token out of the Grabby Giant. And then rather than just slam down a 4-3 Giant when the only thing they have down is a 1-3, I decide to go for the Collector's Vault here since we have drawn a 5th land, so being able to filter away these lands or loot away these lands into actual playable spells throughout this game does seem pretty valuable to me. The other thing that makes me feel like I don't need to immediately slam a 4-3 down, not just that they only have a 1-3, is that because I can spend my island and my treasure to use Collector's Vault here, I get to use the Collector's Vault immediately while still keeping that treasure on board because the Collector's Vault will replace it, and then turn 4 I get to cast Train Troops and get 2 2/2s on the board anyway, so we're still going to get some defenses up very soon here. And our opponent goes for a Return from the Wilds turn 3, grabs another Plains and a 1/1. And we go ahead and use that Collector's Vault, getting out of some Mana Flood here. Drawing into a Diminisher Witch, we're just going to cast Train Troops, get a couple 2/2s, and roll from there. And our opponent just passes the turn on us here, which is interesting. And this game was really weird. A lot of really nebulous decisions where I have no idea what to do, because that's going to happen a lot in this event. We are in a blue-red control deck. We're going to have so many options at so many times, so I honestly could not tell you what happens this game. I don't remember. I see all these options in hand. I'm like, I don't know what the best play is. I also don't remember what the play I made was. So we jam into the Root Rider Fawn here, and I think we go for Diminisher Witch to kill the Root Rider Fawn by putting a Curse roll onto it, so that our Knight potentially trades into their 1/1 and their Root Rider Fawn. I think that was a decent idea here, but they did have a Werefox Bodyguard. I guess that didn't actually change things because they just used it to exile our other 2/2. But we got the kill there. We got the kill on the Root Rider Fawn and the 1/1. But our opponent goes for Return Triumphant on the Root Rider Fawn, and they immediately have a large board state again, thanks to Hopeful Vigil, Return Triumphant. And again, so many options here. 5-card hand still with multiple pieces of card draw between Flick a Coin and Questing Druid. But I go ahead and just jam out an Imidane's Recruiter since a 2/2 is solid at trading here, and that's what Imidane's Recruiter is in here. In this deck for. It's just 3/3/3s. We don't need to be sitting here and holding our Recruiter in exile, just waiting to get a huge haste attack out of it, because we're a pretty creature-light deck. We're a very controlling deck. That's not the ideal way for us to use Recruiter. I mean, it still is the best way to get the max value out of it, but if we need to just make more 2/2s and trade off, then I think it's a decent deck to do that with. So by playing the Recruiter, we also held up the mana to draw the 2 cards, and we drew into a Mountain and an Archive Dragon, so we have to cast those this turn for them not to get exiled. Scry into a Torch the Tower, Witch's Mark, keep them on top. Got our 4/6 Archive Dragon to try to stay stable here. And then our opponent drops a Tough Cookie, and I think you're going to see us deal with that immediately, so they can't start attacking us with their food tokens. But I think we just pass here because we have that Ice Out in hand now. And as long as we keep this Archive Dragon on board, they just don't have great attacks. So I'm just making sure they can't really change the board state too much with like a big removal spell or something. Then I go ahead and ice out this Feral Encounter. I'm not sure that this was the right choice, because Feral Encounter is going to make one of their creatures deal damage equal to its power to one of mine. So until they buff one of their creatures or cast a bigger creature off of the feral encounter, this isn't actually going to kill the Archive Dragon. The reason that I countered it here, though, is that the other thing it does is it lets them dig, I believe, 6 cards deep and pick any creature and cast that. They still have to spend its mana cost, but this is going to be card draw for them, getting them another creature, and worst case scenario, if they have the mana up for the ward on Archive Dragon, they can just shoot the dragon for 4 with the Agatha's Champion so that they can attack us with the whole team, and I'm not really allowed to block here without trading down. So even if they don't actually kill Archive Dragon with Feral Encounter, it is going to make it so I can't block without trading, and then I'll have to take 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 on board if I want to keep the Archive Dragon around. So again, as I said, a lot of nebulous decisions. I don't know if it's right to counter the Feral Encounter or just try to counter whatever creature they find off of it, or maybe we get super lucky and they're trying to actually stack up the Feral Encounter with a combat trick in their hand, and then we counter the combat trick so they can't actually fully kill the dragon. But again, even if I did that, if they're trying to do the combat trick kind of thing, the odds of it being a combat trick that costs them more than 2 mana is astronomically low. So they spend 2 to combat trick their creature for the Feral Encounter to resolve, and I spend the ice out on that, and they still have 2 mana up to pay for the ward to shoot the dragon for 4 instead of lethal, which still gives them the 11 damage attack here potentially. So again, really interesting one here, but I do obviously go for the ice out on the Feral Encounter. And then they send in the Agatha's Champion, and here's where things get a little sketchy. I think I should have realized, because they don't have enough power on board yet to kill the Archive Dragon, and they were trying to cast Feral Encounter, and then they're now attacking with Agatha's Champion, the odds of them having a combat trick here is basically 100%. So I don't think I should have blocked here. I still went through all the math of it in my head. I'm like, they probably have a combat trick here, but the math of it is like, if I don't block here, I don't actually have any real instant speed interaction in my hand against a combat trick anymore. I've used the one counterspell in my deck. So the combat trick's going to get me at some point. If I let the combat trick get me immediately, at least I'd take no damage from Agatha's Champion. Whereas if I wait, I'm going to sit here and take 4 from Champion every turn until the combat trick happens. What I should have thought, though, being patient, being a blue-red control player, is that I have a Grabby Giant in exile. What I should probably do here is just let the 4 in and then play a Grabby Giant and hope that my Grabby Giant trades into the combat trick when they attack with Champion again next turn. So I go for the block here, and obviously our opponent has the +2/+2 trick. It also gives the lifelink, so they gain a ton of life. So that was not ideal, but we've got the mana to use the Collector's Vault, so we're still digging. We can play a Questing Druid here as well to get another solid-sized blocker on the board. I can curse the Agatha's Champion, so their board's all pretty small. The Questing Druid I can now buff up with the Flick a Coin at instant speed to 3 power and toughness, so I can make it big enough to trade into their biggest creature and beat anything else. And our opponent top decks a second Agatha's Champion, and here's the time for Punt Master X, round number 2. I have said many times before that I'm bad at math, but what you're about to see is tragic. So here's the moment of truth. Our opponent drops the Agatha's Champion on board, bargained away, targets the Questing Druid with this Agatha's Champion, and in my head I was like, I know that the numbers add up to where I can flick a coin and trade. For some reason, I know that was my initial thought. I was like, I can flick a coin and trade. For some reason, I didn't put 2 and 2 together. When I told myself that I could flick a coin and trade, I was like, okay, so I'll just cast flick a coin the best way I can. I'll flick a coin their 1/1 and then I'll trade. No, I can flick a coin and trade because I can deal the 1 damage to the 4/4 champion, not because just casting flick a coin automatically trades. So that was loose for sure. And we go down to 8 here, and then we draw into a Johann's Stopgap. So now we're just going to slam down the Grabby Giant, I think. I mean, this is another, again, so many options, another interesting turn here. I think what we do is we slam down the Grabby Giant and hold up Horned Lockwhale. I think that's what I would do if I was going back to it. Let's see. Not actually sure what's best here. Oh, that's reasonable. Stopgap the token, so that's permanently dead. And then drop Talion's Messenger, hold up the Lock Whale. The idea is that the Messenger can block the 2/4, the Lock Whale can stop the 4/4 worth of damage, and we just take 3. This actually stops the most damage out of all of our lines, and I think I was 100% on just preserving life total here. We could have done Grabby Giant and just hold up the Lock Whale, but then they can attack with everybody and deal a little bit more damage that way. This stops a lot of the damage, because permanently killing the 2/2, slowing down the Agatha Champion, and blocking the 2/4 is the max we can do for the turn. So I actually think that was a pretty nice line, and even my future self did not figure that one out here. I'm not even playing the game, but just the multitasking of trying to talk through the plays here has gotten me not finding those kind of lines. However, past self made some real bad punts twice in a row, so, you know, future Gauntlet's got some words for him. So then we Collector's Vault into an Obira's Attendants, which gives us a really nice line, being able to drop a Grabby Giant and hold up the Obira's Attendants parry, where we can give -4/-0 at instant speed, so that we can just blank the fight from the Agatha's Champion. So excellent draw off of the Collector's Vault, and it gives us a really crisp line here. Dropping the Giant, holding up the parry to just not care about the fight trigger at all. And that is what we do. We parry the champion, keep all our stuff on board, and they just scoop right there. Now, I think this was a bit of a preemptive scoop from our opponent. There was some very loose stuff from me earlier, and maybe that's why they got a little tilted here, and they were like, I can't believe that just happened to me against this absolute buffoon. But, I mean, they still keep the champion. I do have more cards than them. I'm guessing their last card must have been just like another land or just garbage there. And they just see that they have a 4/4, a 2/2, and a 2/4 against what is going to be a 4/3, 2/4 flyer that's going to keep getting bigger, a 6/6, multiple 3/4s. We've got all the blocks we need to lock out the game from this point on. But if I made just a couple more punts like I was doing early there, I think our opponent could still have crawled back into it. So really, really loose game, the loosest game of the event. But we do manage to crawl back in the end with some really, really excellent draws, drawing our strongest cards of Lock Whale and Messenger, drawing that desperate parry perfectly timed for the Agatha's Champion. Kind of an MVP goes to Collector's Vault here. It had done a lot of digging this game, and really found us some solutions to the issues we were facing. So 1-0 to start off the Arena Open Day 1 event. Here we are now for game 2. Our opponent is on the play, so we're on the draw, which I think is why, I decided to keep here, because we're 1 land draw away from Flick a Coin and Frantic Firebolt and a 2/2 Recruiter. That's less interesting, but being able to flick a coin at 3 mana I think makes this a reasonable 2-lander keep. And we draw perfectly. We find a Grabby Giant so we can get another treasure token. I guess it's not perfectly, just an island would be drawing perfectly. And one of the things that I was considering here was torching that 2/2 the second they played it. And I actually think that, obviously in hindsight that I should have, but I think just generally I probably should have regardless, because this hand has a lot of stuff to do the second that it finds the 3rd mana. And you're going to see how that plays out for us here, because I really need the treasure token from Grabby Giant. This now leads to me not torching anything this turn. I just play the treasure thing, and then I just flick a coin the Courtier. That torch tower is still sitting in my hand. It would have stopped 4 damage from that 2/2 by now if I had just spent my 1 mana when they played the 2/2. And then with all these solid instants in hand, I decided to just pass the turn here. I did count up my hand to make sure I'm not discarding a card. But with Double Torch, with Firebolt, with the Horned Lock Whale, I'm just holding the mana up. And we go ahead and torch the 2/2 now. And there's a Spell Scorn Coven hitting the board, making us discard a card here. I actually don't remember what I discard. I think the Vantress Transmuter. Since our opponent's on white-black, they're not likely to have anything super big, and once they do, I have 1 Frantic Firebolt to permanently kill something big, and 1 Horned Lock Whale to bounce it. So we scry the 5 mana flyer to the bottom because we're pretty low on mana still here. Drop a threat, they exile it, we go for land 4 and train some troops up. Get a couple 2/2s. And then there's a Devouring Sugar Maw, which is a huge threat, so we just go ahead and Firebolt that immediately. We get to jam in with the 2/2s. They've got the 1/1 blocker that it provided, but the 2/2s can still get in. And now they give us a beautiful Flick a Coin target with that Voracious Vermin, but they also cast an Oversold Cemetery. The way that that works, once they have 4 creatures in their grave, they get to return a creature from their grave to hand during their upkeep every turn. So if they get to 4 creatures in grave, we're going to have massive, massive issues. And of course, we top deck the Ice Out the turn after they play the Cemetery, which is super, super awkward because that's our best answer to that. But we go ahead and Flick a Coin the Rat, which is still great, still going to get us damage in here. Now we've drawn into a Stone Splitter Bolt for more removal. Now they Shatter the Oath on our 2/2. Trying to buff their 1/1. And with an opponent at 12 life, 3 out of 4 creatures in grave for the Oversold Cemetery, I decide to Ice Out the Shatter the Oath so I can just try to jam in for lethal before they draw into another creature. Because if they draw into another creature and they try to cast it, I can't really Ice Out their creature. Because if I Ice Out their next creature, or if I Stone Splitter Bolt their next creature even, I'm just putting a 4th creature in grave so that the Oversold Cemetery gets to pick up their Devouring Sugar Maw and start jamming that thing out again. So that's why I decided to just Ice Out immediately here. I'm trying to preserve as much power on this board as possible and just get in quickly before they draw into another creature. So we draw into a Johan's Stopgap, which is going to let us kill the 1/1 and guaranteed hit for 4 here. So we do. And they go ahead and eat their food and scry off the Hopeful Vigil in their upkeep. Both to the top, drawn to an Armory Mice, which literally any creature is a great draw because of the Oversold Cemetery. And this is going to make it so next time I try to attack in, they get a 4th creature in grave, and then they pick something up in their upkeep. Or I shoot the Armory Mice, and then they pick something up in their upkeep. I decide to shoot the Armory Mice and just try to kill them here, because if I top deck a land, then we can kill them on the crackback before Oversold Cemetery triggers 1 time. So I feel like it's our best bet here. If I don't just try to immediate lethal, I can't really afford to declare an attack again after this point, because then I'm attacking in and giving them a 4th creature in grave for the Oversold Cemetery. The really big issue with them picking up the Devouring Sugar Maw is its adventure. They get a 1/1 and a food every time they do that, so they can just keep rolling that Sugar Maw out. So here I am going for it. We're trying to find lethal before the Oversold Cemetery starts triggering. We're just going to kill the Armory Mice. We're going to top deck a land. We're going to jam out Grabby Giant, Recruiter, and deal lethal. But we didn't draw a land. So now our option is to attack for 9 and put them to 2, or to cast Quick Study and just draw some cards, play a land, play a Grabby Giant, try to go for lethal next turn. I decide, you know what, if we just put them to 2, it should be quite unlikely that they manage to stabilize and not die on our next attack anyway. So I'm just going to go for full damage here. And I can play Recruiter and Quick Study to set up for some more plays next turn. And we find a Red Cap Thief and an island. So opponent's Oversold Cemetery triggers, and if they just have this Sugar Maw, they're very dead. They did scry 2 to the top though, so if they have just some other random creature, because the first card they put there was an Armory Mice. If they just have another creature underneath the Armory Mice, I think we're still in great shape here. So they pick up that Sugar Maw, and the second card they scried into was a board wipe for maximum punishment of the line here. Blow up everything except their rat token, stay at 2 life with the ability to get another food and a 1/1 in their hand. And we have no haste anymore. We draw into a Diminisher Witch. It's like, okay, they're still at 2 life right now. They're not picking up another card with Oversold Cemetery. Let's slam down some power. Red Cap Thief and Grabby Giant. Because we can't play 3 creatures this turn. I just want to go wide. So play a 2/3 and a 4/3, play 2 creatures. They top deck the Armory Mice naturally here. And this is where things get super awkward. So I can Diminisher Witch the Sugar Maw so that I could attack in without chump attacking, but then they can chump with the Sugar Maw, and that's their 4th creature in grave, so they can just pick it up to the Oversold Cemetery again, get another food token and another 1/1 and just get farther out of reach. I could also like attack in and then post-combat Diminisher Witch to kill the Sugar Maw, but again, if the Sugar Maw ends up in the graveyard, it's just going right back to the hand and gaining them more life, so our attacks start looking really, really bad here. And this is where I decide our best outs to this Oversold Cemetery is 100%. We just need to find an evasive threat. We need to find a flyer. And I go ahead and look through my deck list. We have an Archive Dragon still in there. We also have the 5-mana 3/4 Flying Fairy, but we scried that to the bottom, which is awkward. So we're mainly just looking for Archive Dragon here. And using the Grabby Giant to dig there. So I held on to the Witch's Mark here, so I'd still have access to the Horned Lock Whale's ability. I don't think I actually should have done it here, though. I think holding up the mana to use Horned Lock Whale's ability made me a little overexcited to use it, because I'm at 15 life here. I can go down to 9, and then we can try to find a reasonable crackback, now that they won't have the Sugar Maw to pick up from their grave. If I use a Cursed Roll on an Armory Mice or whatever their next creature is, and they pick up that from grave with the Oversold Cemetery, it's not that bad. But if they can recast the Sugar Maw's life gain, then they just get a little more breathing room here. So I do go for it. I don't think it's horrible that I went for it there, but I think it would have been better not to. And I don't know what is in their hand if they made that attack. So I don't remember what's in their hand here, but maybe that would have been the winning line if I just didn't do anything there, because then they're down to 2, just 2 blockers down. I guess we can't kill them. So yeah, we just trade into the Armory Mice, they pick up the mice. Yeah, probably doesn't find an excellent attack here, but we get the 1/1 out of the way without getting rid of their Sugar Maw and giving them the adventure again. So we're just digging here, digging for the flyers, scrying anything that isn't the flyer to the bottom, drawing cards. We're down to 11 cards now. There is a Hatching Plans, and I figure 11 cards, they're at 2 life. They have a food token, though, so they're at basically 5. Then they get to use the Sugar Maw again. They're at basically 7. We're going to need to get 2 hits in with an Archive Dragon, but that's it. If we resolve an Archive Dragon, we kill them in 2 swings, so I do decide to drop the Hatching Plans, I think. Actually, no, because I have the 6-mana Horned Lock Whale to play. I might just pass and hold up the Lock Whale here. But I am going to decide to set up the Hatching Plans Diminisher Witch in the future, because we need to find that Archive Dragon. And as long as it's not in like the bottom 3-4 cards, we will win the game off a couple attacks with it. So our opponent draws back into the Devouring Sugar Maw, and then they pass the turn. We slam down the Lock Whale. Draw another land. And I have exactly enough mana to set up the Hatching Plans and also draw a couple Grabby Giant cards here. There's looking at the Obeer's Attendant on the bottom of our library being sad. So yeah, we go ahead and Grabby Giant first to see if what we draw into changes what we want to do. It's just another land. At this point, I decide to drop the Hatching Plans. Pass the turn. I'm threatening to have like the bargain counterspell by playing it this way and waiting to use the 3rd Grabby Giant trigger, which I thought was worth it at the time, but might not have been worth it in the end, as you may see. Although I did draw into another land, so if the draw was going to be another land, I still would have just played Hatching Plans. If I did that all main phase, we would have played Hatching Plans with our last 2 mana instead of dumping 3 into Grabby Giant again. So it works out fine. So now I draw into a Questing Druid, so we can go ahead and draw some cards without having to crack the Hatching Plans here just yet. And I don't really want to use Questing Druid and Hatching Plans is the big problem. So I like the idea of using Questing Druid instead, just digging 2 cards deeper rather than going super deep. But we find Collector's Vault in it. That Archive Dragon's somewhere in the bottom 5. Technically the bottom 3, because we scried 2 other cards to the bottom. So we're just like, oh, Archive Dragon, if you could have been slightly higher here. So we drop the Questing Druid. And then I do go ahead and drop the Diminisher Witch to turn the Devouring Sugarmaw into a 1/1. Not so we can actually get any attacks in on the ground, but just so that if it attacks us, we can just keep taking 1 every single turn. But yeah, we're definitely not going to try to put that in their graveyard again. Drawn to another land, and that means that the Archive Dragon is one of the bottom 2 cards of our deck this game, which is extra rough. And at this point, I'm just going to draw it naturally. As you can see, I'm like, we're finally there. Let's do it. Let's drop the thing. I'm like, okay. 3 cards left. We just attack with this Archive Dragon twice, and we're there. Pass the turn. They go for a Rowan's Grim Search. Draw 2, take 2. Sugarmaw ability goes on the stack. Monstrosity hits the board. And then upkeep, Stroke of Midnight, targeting Hatching Plans to destroy target non-land permanent. And when Hatching Plans goes to the graveyard, for any reason, you have to draw 3 cards. And we have 3 cards in our library, and we're moving towards our draw step. So you can see my disbelief here. I'm like, wait, no, it's not. You don't have to, do you? It's not when it goes to grave for any reason, is it? But it is. And that is how we find our first loss of the day. A minor early decision of putting a Hatching Plans on the board that doesn't pan out since we decide to use other methods to draw cards does lead to the defeat in the end if our opponent did not find removal for Archive Dragon and we didn't have a Hatching Plans on board. We could have tried to kill them in a couple swings. But that is 1-1 heading into Game 3. Here we are now for Game 3 on the play. Thanks to the Crystal Grotto, we can have whatever color of mana we need. We just might need to play off-curve to do it. We've got the turn 2 Hatching Plans with no bargain currently in the hand, but we've got like 7 or 8 bargain spells in the deck, so I think it was reasonable to keep it here, especially with other card draw like Quick Study, to dig farther towards those bargain spells. So Crystal Grotto, turn 1, Hatching Plans, turn 2. Our opponent is on black, white, and green, getting a food token from a Hollow Scavenger. Just get our 3 mana out, turn 3, and we're just going to Quick Study during the end step, likely. There's a Mosswood Dread Knight for our opponent, a very nice card draw engine. And a Brave the Wilds, finding another color of mana, just another forest for our opponent. Alright, draw a couple cards, we find a Transmuter and a Stopgap, so now we have a Stopgap to crack the Hatching Plans. I go ahead and drop the Talion's Messenger because it gets to be a big threat and a card selection engine all in one, which is pretty nice. And here I'm considering if I should bounce the Dread Knight or not, and I think draw 4 is absolutely worth it, even if it means they get to replay their adventure and draw another card. It's going to slow them down, it's going to give us plenty of cards to make up for the fact that we're giving them an extra card here. So, I do jam that out, attack with Talion's Messenger, discard a Sleight of Hand here because we definitely still want more lands, and I actually use the Grabby Giant Adventure, just main phase, so that I don't have to discard the hand size. I was almost considering using Questing Druid and having those cards in exile the next turn, but that would have been a mistake because I think they would actually just be permanently exiled as soon as we hit our end step. I think you have to use the Questing Druid at instant speed. All right, so we just keep digging with that Talion's Messenger. Just keep riding that snowball all the way to victory and give it its friend, an Archive Dragon, for a massive amount of flying damage on the board. And we're just trying to jam in with these two until our opponent goes to 0. Very simple stuff here. We've got no counterspells in the hand. The only instant speed interaction that we have only works against attacking creatures, so we're more than happy to tap out for more flying damage. Now, if we clear a path by getting that High Fae Negotiator out of the way, we're going to hit them for 8, which halves their life total, kills them in just 2 swings here. So I decided to play the Questing Druid since we're getting nice and aggressive here and putting them pretty low, so that we can have another threat on the board if one of these flyers gets dealt with. Because I have so many blue and red spells in hand, I can buff the Druid up some more and jam in with that for some damage. And our opponent does concede in response, and that leads us to 2 and 1 off the back of some nasty, nasty flyers. Here we are now for game 4. A bit of a sketchy hand here, but Collector's Vault potentially gives us treasure. If we do hit a red source, we have multiple treasure producers with Grabby Giant and Flick a Coin. So I do think in the end I decide to keep this, but it is a little sketchy. Luckily we are on the draw, which is helpful for this hand. Finding that mountain a little sooner, potentially. Our opponent leads off with a Ratcatcher Trainee, turn 2. We slam down the hatching plans with an Ice Out to go with it. We found the bargain for that. And we are going to just hold up that Ice Out, and it does not matter what quality of spell they cast here. Any spell in the game, we're just going to counter it to draw 3 and dig into that mountain. Because now if we find the mountain, we get to clear out the Ratcatcher Trainee and really set up our mana thanks to the Flick a Coin. And we sack the hatching plans, draw 3, don't find the mountain, but we found it during the draw step, luckily. And that is just going to be time to Flick a Coin the Ratcatcher Trainee. And thanks to that card draw, things do get a little bit awkward here, where I'll have to discard the hand size if I don't cast one of my adventures, which means I'm going to have to sack my treasure here or discard a card. And I think it's definitely better to sack the treasure than discard a card. I was considering using the Croaking Curse on the Belligerent to just make it a 1/1, take less damage next turn. But it has a really good celebration ability, even if I make it a 1/1, so I want to use my Stone Splitter Bolt on that ideally, save the Curse Roll for something else. So I just use the Grabby Giant, sack my treasure, get another treasure, just have that replace itself so I don't have to discard a card. Now I have exactly enough mana to slam down a Collector's Vault and bargain with the Stone Splitter Bolt to kill the Belligerent. So I think that's what I do here, because I definitely want to kill the Belligerent. And this would let me do that while getting a bit of a mana investment out of the way for the Collector's Vault to start popping off. And that is what we do. There's a Godric Cloaked Reveler from our opponent. 3/3 haste. It can turn itself into a flyer when it hits Celebration and get extra damage in. So I'm like, all right, let's turn Godric into a 1/1. Let's get our reach blocker on the board. So if they do trigger Celebration, I can still have Grabby Giant trade into the Godric, even if they dump their mana into Fire Breathing it, making it bigger. So that's the play there. But then our opponent drops a Ginger Brute here. Gives it the unblock ability. We go for stopping as much damage as we can, blocking that Woodland Acolyte, because the Godric can't give itself +1/+0 unless they have triggered Celebration. And our opponent goes for Minecart Daredevil, which would have been lethal if I blocked any other way, because then they would have just given the 2-power creature +2 and hit me for 5 exactly. So it's the best we could have done there, having the Ride the Rails adventure just trade up into our Grabby Giant. Goes to our next turn here. We're down to 3. Things are looking super sketchy. But we go ahead and make as many blockers as we can. Italian's Messenger and a Vantress Transmuter. We've got 1 flying blocker for the Godric, 1 blocker on the ground with the Vantress Transmuter. But there's the Knightly Valor to buff the Ginger Brute, and that's an unblockable 3-power Ginger Brute, knocking us down to 1 and 2. So at this point, we're going to have to win 6 games in a row in order to make it into the Arena Open Day 2. Here we are now for game number 4. Got that Hatching Plans with a Johann Stopgap to draw the extra cards and find our red source. So that's why we kept here. And our opponent just keeps passing turn. We're like, all right, I guess we'll just keep passing turn to each other. We can use the Questing Druid to draw some cards or the Grabby Giant to get a treasure if they don't do anything. And they don't do anything, so we're going to draw those Questing Druid cards, find a Torch the Tower, which is pretty awkward and pretty sad. It's just going to stay in exile forever. And I think since they had no creatures on board, it actually might have been pretty reasonable to have just gone for the treasure token off the Grabby Giant rather than the card draw off of the Questing Druid. Because we have so many burn spells in our deck and bounce spells and stuff, if we drew into any of those, they'd be really awkward hits off the Questing Druid, as we saw there. But then, once our opponent hits 5 mana, they drop a 5-drop Scream Puff, and it's like, alright, let's go. Johan's stopgap time, let's get our draw 4, buff our Questing Druid, go from there. Now I get to hold up a bunch of Flicka coins with a Questing Druid on the board. Hopefully I won't misdo my math. Do a fight spell again with the Questing Druid, but Feed the Cauldron just straight up kills the Questing Druid. No math to be done there. There's a Lord Skitter's Blessing with 0 creatures on board, so I'm like, okay. Not until they put an enchantment on one of their creatures will that spell do anything at all, so I'm not worried about it. Go ahead and drop the Grabby Giant, because I can slam that down and still hold up the Flicka coins, and I would rather not slam down the whale immediately, because we know they have a Scream Puff coming, and we have some... we've got a pretty good incentive to just get the 2-for-1 removal spell plus creature off the whale. But we also know we're drawing into a Stone Splitter Bolt, and this is their only threat, so I go ahead and just dump 7 mana into killing the Scream Puff. That way they can't save it with the +2/+2 trick. And jam in for 4. Because, yeah, they've got a weird hand here where it seems like they just don't have many threats. So I'm like, all right, let's just ride the Grabby Giant. I was considering Witch's Marking pre-combat, putting a Wicked Roll on the Giant, but I'm like, if they have no creatures here, it must be a bunch of removal. I probably shouldn't try to put a Wicked Roll on the Grabby Giant, because if you try to put a roll on one of your creatures with Witch's Mark and they destroy it in response, then the whole thing gets countered. You don't get the card draw off the Witch's Mark either. All right. And at this point, if they just keep not playing creatures forever, I'm like, okay, well, now that I have no threats, I'll replace my threat with this 6/6 Lock Whale. But they've got another removal spell for that one, so there goes the 6/6. Scry 2 cards to the top for our opponent. Now we just Witch's Mark to draw 2. Looking for any creature, and we find our best threat in the deck, the Archive Dragon, the 4/6 flyer with Ward 2. Pretty perfect draw. We have 16 cards left in the deck, so I'm like, that's enough cards to use Collector's Vault for some card selection here. There's a Hopeless Nightmare from our opponent. We ditch our island. They drop a Shrouded Shepherd, just -1/-1 to everybody, and then, suspiciously enough, our opponent does not cast the Shrouded Shepherd. They cleave shadows to show us that they have a Shrouded Shepherd and do nothing else, and then they just pass the turn. So super suspicious stuff from our opponent here. I think some of you could probably gather what's going on here. They've got some kind of board wipe maybe in their hand, and they just don't want to play the creature yet. But if you can figure out the exact card they have in hand, there's a way to do it. But congratulations. So they go for Rankle's Prank. And the way that you could figure out this is the exact card in their hand is that why would you ever cleave shadows for no value? It would be because you get your Shrouded Shepherd out of your hand if you want to have each player discard 2 cards. So by getting the Shrouded Shepherd out of their hand, if they top decked just a land or something, this gives them another turn, well, it gives us another turn to play another creature and then have them make us sacrifice both our creatures and discard 2 cards without our opponent having to discard anything. But they drew into some kind of creature, some kind of threat, and that means they're going to have to just use this to kill the Archive Dragon, do the sack too, because they don't want to discard the card that they drew into, but also they don't want to keep getting hit by the Archive Dragon. So they go ahead and clear that out, but keep their card in hand. So I dig with the Collector's Vault here because we have not drawn our counterspell this game, so just in case we hit it, it would be quite good here with an Archive Dragon on board and with so few threats in our deck. So I also go for the Flick a Coin cycle and then the Quick Study, because if I draw it now, I can sack both treasures and then sack the Collector's Vault to the bargain, but we just don't find it. So we dug, but we did not find it. There's a Knight of Doves for our opponent, which is going to make a 1/1 flyer whenever an enchantment goes to their graveyard, but they only have 2 mana up, so they can't sack the Hopeless Nightmare right now. So I go ahead and Sleight of Hand into a Red Cap Thief for some more random threats, just random dorks. Immediately torch the tower, that Knight of Doves, so they don't get any triggers off of it. Find the Imidane's Recruiter for a massive amount of damage with these treasure tokens. And the Crystal Grotto. Honestly, I think either way we can train troops and play Recruiter in one turn. And then I just jam out my current board state rather than digging for the Recruiter off Collector's Vault. I'm like, let's just jam these creatures down and then we'll do the full train troops package next turn for big damage. Our opponent gets the Scry 2 off of the Hopeless Nightmare, drops a Shrouded Shepherd, drops a Spellbook Vendor, and I go ahead and kill that vendor with the Firebolt. And now we draw into an Imidane's Recruiter. We slam down the trained troops, slam down the Recruiter. I think I'm doing the math here in my head also. But then we obviously just jam in, even if it isn't lethal. And I don't remember the math here. I don't think it is. Yeah, we hit them down to 2 life. But clear their board. They have 1 top deck to get out of it, and they don't. So that does put us to 3-2. Here we are now for game number 6. Snap Keep here. We've got the Hatching Plans, no bargain for it, but there's plenty in the deck. Questing Druid for some early card draw, Quick Study for some card draw. The Questing Druid honestly is more like late game card draw because we don't want to hit, you know, a 4 or 5 mana spell when I only have 3 mana available. So the later we use the Questing Druid, the safer it is in terms of hitting spells we can actually cast. So I just put the Hatching Plans on the board, get ready to Quick Study here. Our opponent is starting off with Skewer Slinger into Armory Mice, which is lucky for us. If they drew those in the opposite order, we would have been taking significantly more damage right now. Take 3 instead of 1 there. And I'm like, ooh, Flick a Coin would be such a good draw here. We don't find it, though, so we go ahead and just bargain away the Hatching Plans for the draw 3, digging pretty much specifically for Flick a Coins, but we do get to at least curse the Armory Mice to just take 2 damage a turn. They just have 2 1-power creatures, which is not bad for us. Now a Princess Takes Flight is going to exile our Diminisher Witch, give them 2 extra power next turn to jam in for a lot. And I just hold on to this Torch the Tower. They're a red-white deck, which is a color pair that can have a lot of nice little aggro creatures. I'm trying to save the Torch the Tower for something that's more than 1 power. So scry with the Crystal Grotto, Sleight of Hand into a Stopgap, pass the turn, holding up Ice Out most importantly, but because of the amount of instants that we have, even if we don't Ice Out something, we have plenty of other options. We can draw cards with Questing Druid, we can torch something with Torch the Tower. Our opponent is going to go for an Edgewall pack here, and I do decide to Ice Out because it is going to be a menacing threat and a token. So if I decide to just like Torch the Tower, first of all, I would need Bargain to be able to kill the 3/3 menace with Torch the Tower. But even if I could, they'd still have a rat left behind. I guess technically I could bargain away the Cursed Roll, but then the Armory Mice is back to 3 power, and we're still taking more damage, so... Next turn, we just slam dunk that Archive Dragon on the board, try to stabilize off that, and they don't have a way to sacrifice their Princess Takes Flight, so we get a Diminisher Witch back as well, and we've got a really good defensive board, but they have a second copy of the Princess Takes Flight to exile our dragon again. So we find a Flick a Coin off of the Archive Dragon Scry, and also a Frantic Firebolt for the future, but I have many options of what to do here. Once again, all the options all the time. I do go ahead and Flick a Coin at the rat and Stopgap the Slinger, because this way we're stopping them from getting any extra damage in off of the second chapter of the Princess Takes Flight, and we're getting a free attack in here, which is a really nice turn, because we don't have to hold up a blocker anymore if we clear out all their creatures. All right, they drop a Savior of the Sleeping and a Skewer Slinger, and their enchantment is about to die, which would buff the Savior of the Sleeping with a +1/+1 counter. So I think we go ahead and bargain a Torch the Tower to kill the Savior of the Sleeping before it gets any bigger. I do send in the Diminisher Witch first, though, so we might be able to use Obira's Attendance's Adventure to get a kill without spending a card, because that would be really good for us, but they don't make any blocks, so we do Torch the Tower, the Savior of the Sleeping, and pass from there, holding up a Frantic Firebolt or a Questing Druid, and we get to scry off this Archive Dragon, because once again, they do not have a way to bargain away their Princess Takes Flight. So we scry into Imidane's Recruiter, and that's pretty much it. It's just Imidane's Recruiter. That's all we need to hit. The other card we scried to the bottom. I think it was just like a land or something. Our opponent goes for Besotted Knight on the Skewer Slinger, and now I can Firebolt to kill their Skewer Slinger and the Besotted Knight, which is super gross. And then I'm like, alright, we just drop the Druid, give the board haste, and that is lethal. Quick kill there, and we are now 4-2 heading into the next game. This is game number 7 here. Our opponent is on the play. We do not have double blue here, which is the only real concern, but I do have the Flick a Coin for a treasure. I have the Questing Druid to maybe try to draw into some lands, so this is going to be a keep. Our opponent starts with turn 1 Vampiric Rites, so they can sack their creatures to gain a life throughout this game. They hit us with the Hopeless Nightmare, and that's a rough one. I have no idea what the right discard is here. I don't think it's going to be Questing Druid because card advantage is so important to this deck in the late game. I think we might discard the Stopgap, because it's like if they don't play too many early threats, we can just flick and Stone Splitter Bolt and just permanently kill the cards that they do play. They do drop a Voracious Vermin. Again, perfect Flick a Coin target. We just get that out of the way immediately. And I get to hold up a Torch the Tower while doing that, thanks to the treasure token. Although, obviously, we would prefer to keep it for bargaining. There's a Dark Tutelage from our opponent, which is a very interesting one. They reveal the top card of their library during their upkeep, lose life equal to its mana cost, and then draw it. So we're like, okay, they're going to have a lot of cards this game, but they have to spend a lot of life to get those cards. So we probably want to try to get our threats down as soon as we can once we get them, but currently our only threat is a Questing Druid, and if I cast it right now, I'm not holding up my counter spell, let alone my removal. So decide to pass the turn here. And our opponent goes for a back for seconds, sacrificing a Hopeless Nightmare to bring their Voracious Vermin back onto the board. But it's just one card, it's not a 2-for-1, so I just let it happen. Save the ice out for something else, and go ahead and just Torch the Vermin here. Because I can Torch the Vermin and use the Questing Druid, thanks to the Crystal Grotto. We find a Mountain and a Witch's Mark off of the Questing Druid's Adventure. We play the Mountain, but Witch's Mark doesn't look incredible here. And I think I was telling my future self here by shaking the Diminisher Witch and Stone Splitter Bolt. I actually do go for full value, and the reason is because I shook Diminisher Witch and Stone Splitter Bolt, obviously. Because I have Diminisher Witch and Stone Splitter Bolt for any big creatures coming up for our opponent, I decide it's not that likely that they're going to play something I really need to ice out here, because the only thing that I would need to ice out would be non-creature spells, and the vast majority of those are just going to be removal spells. And if they remove the Questing Druid, it's rough, but if they just keep hitting me with 2 rats a turn, we'll probably still just win the race against the Dark Tutelage. So I figure basically anything they play next turn is going to be fine, and it was fine. It was a little sad to lose the Questing Druid, but I think still for the best that we got the Witch's Mark there and got the full card draw. So now they drop Voracious Vermin, we allow it. We've got the Flick a Coin for it. They will get another rat, but we can still try to outrace the Dark Tutelage pretty easily because all of the rats can't block, so as soon as I can play an attacker, we're going to get large damage in. And I do decide to just play the Whale here. So if we can resolve a Flick a Coin on the Voracious Vermin, we're just going to jam in for 6 and really, really get there with Tutelage. Now, I do highlight the Vampiric Rites here because that makes the Flick a Coin really awkward. where I can't really just flick a coin vermin pre-combat without them getting some value, because they can draw the card and counter the flick a coin. I don't draw the card, I don't get the treasure. So I don't know if this was right here, because we still would have gotten more damage if I cleared out the vermin, but I decided to just hold up the flick a coin rather than run it into the Vampiric Rites ability. So we do less damage to our opponents. And wow, I wish I played like this the whole time, because it's really getting me into my old my old head. By shaking Diminisher Witch and Stone Splitter Bolt there, it's like, that's why I didn't ice out the Sugar Maw. Because I have many ways to kill it. Making the post-commentary way easier as we get into these late games. Because I think this was... Once I get into these late games, this is the point where I'm like, oh wait, this run might matter. We're starting to get close to a potential 7 win here. So exile the Dork, flick a coin one of the rats to stop some damage. We're going to go for the Stone Splitter Bolt on the Sugar Maw during our turn. Just going for the race here. So I'm debating between hatching plans to draw the cards with the Stone Splitter Bolt, or I can just Stone Splitter Bolt sacking the treasure and just hold my ice out up, and I decide that's better. At this point, they're down to 10, they're taking 6, they're going to 4 life. We're just out racing them. We don't need more card advantage right now. We just need to make sure they can't turn the tides here and stop us from out racing them. So let's just hold the counterspell up rather than drawing another 3 cards here. Surprised I didn't vigorously shake the mouse over their life total when I made that play to remind my future self why I did that. I decide to let the Hearth Elemental resolve, because as long as they don't like crescendo me or something, like double crescendo to kill me out of nowhere, I still think them playing chump blockers is going to be fine. So we go down to 8, let them resolve an Ashiok's Reaper as well. Now we are relying a little bit more on their tutelage killing them, since they've got 2 chump blockers for the Lock Whale. But now I have the mana to go ahead and use the Diminisher Witch to turn the Hearth Elemental into a 1/1, so they can't double block and kill my Lock Whale. And when I say I have the mana to do that, I mean I have the mana to do that while still holding up my counter spell, which is the thing I want to do. So we do that and hold up the counter spell, and they hit a 5-drop off the Dark Tutelage and lose 5 life. And this brings us into game number 8, 5-2 now. Big recovery after the 1-2 start. So I played the Mountain to hold up Torch Tower in case they played like a really good 1-drop creature, so I could torch it because I figured it's really unlikely I want to do anything else but Sleight of Hand turn 2 anyway. And it worked out, I just Sleight of Hand turn 2 and we're good. Our opponent starts with a Baronati. And we go for the Witch's Mark, discard a island and draw 2 so that I could play a Mountain after doing Witch's Mark to hold up the Torch to Tower. Alright, we've got 4 mana available. I'm just going to pass the turn holding up Quick Study, Torch the Tower to draw into more mana and still have my little removal spell at the ready. Take another damage from Baronati, but they're just going to buff it up again, so we'll take 2. Draw a couple off Quick Study. Hit the lands that we need, which is beautiful. Drop land number 5. And I think I might just slam down, just slam down the Obira's Attendants here. Forces them to do a removal spell or something this time, instead of just constantly spending mana on the Baronati buff. And they do cast a Spellbook Vendor now that we're tapped out, but our hand is all removal spells mainly, so we can just kill that Spellbook Vendor when it goes back to our turn. And that is what I do immediately. We're just going to torch the Spellbook Vendor. It did get a roll onto the Baronati, so I go ahead and bounce that. Draw the card. Get the roll off of it forever, even if they can replay the Baronati. And they tap out for a Scream Puff here. And now we could tap out and Stone Splitter Bolt it, but then I don't get to hold up the ice out. So I think I opt to just turn it into a 1/1 and hold up the ice out. Which is like still kind of annoying, because if it hits me, they do get a food. But Not massively so. Then they cast a Tail for the Ages, and that actually changes my line here. I decide to Stone Splitter Bolt the Scream Puff, because if I just kill it and they have no enchanted creatures on board, then their Tail for the Ages does nothing. Then they try to save it with Moment of Valor, and I'm like, okay, we'll counter the Moment of Valor again, because unless they draw more ways to use rolls, this Tail for the Ages doesn't actually do anything. They have to have enchanted creatures on the board for that card to matter at all. So I think I'm much cooler with letting that resolve than letting the Scream Puff stay on board. So at this point, we don't have a counterspell to hold up anymore, so we're just jamming out another threat and getting ready to draw cards off the Questing Druid. There's a Neva stocked by Nightmares, 2/2 Menace, and they can pick up the Scream Puff, but that costs 5 mana, so it's going to take a while for them to replay that. They do drop down a Barrow Naughty, though. We hit a land and a Talion's Messenger, so we are definitely playing Talion's Messenger this turn, but we drew into a Crystal Grotto, which means I can actually play the Questing Druid before I cast the Talion's Messenger to have a slightly bigger threat on the board. Then, off of the Talion's Messenger card draw, I can hit the Frantic Firebolt and have that at the ready if I need it. And they go for the double block on Transmuter, so I'm just going to dump this Firebolt on the board so that I can kill their whole board without losing any creatures. And they're down to 7 now, facing 4 threats on our board. A 4/5, a 3/4, a 3/3, and a 1/3. Beefy board state for us. Our opponent recasts the Scream Puff. Puts a roll on it, but that is game. That is now 6-2, and that is why today's video is this Arena Open Day 1 run. This is the one run where I did make it to that final battle, that game 9. We went 5-3, 3-3, and this was the final run that I had time for today. So fingers crossed, but we'll see how the run ends as we head into that final battle. And here we are for the final game of my longest Arena Open Day 1 run. This is a keep, not a snap keep. But, I mean, well, it is a snap keep to me. It's got both the colors, it's got reasonable spells. So we'll keep it. But it's not like an insane hand or anything until we draw into a Talion's Messenger. It's like, okay, now we've got an insane early threat that basically makes our opponent have to have removal for it quickly, otherwise it snowballs. Snowballing, of course, meaning that it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. That snowball gets bigger as it rolls down the hill until it's unstoppable, and that is what Talion's Messenger does, getting all those +1/+1 counters over time. So I go ahead and play the Red Cap Thief, because I just want to get really, really aggressive when I have a snowballing threat like a Talion's Messenger on the board. So I'm doing that so that I can play more creatures on the board while bouncing the Grabby Giant. 100% we were going to bounce the Grabby Giant that turn to get the Messenger in, because if I bounce it now, Messenger turns into a 2/4, then if they recast it again, it's a 3/5, and the Grabby Giant can't block the Messenger well when it attacks again. So no matter what, the play there is definitely to bounce the Grabby Giant. The question's really whether or not you play the Red Cap Thief or not. And I'm pretty happy with my choice. Get some extra damage in here. You can see me immediately holding the ice out here. I'm like, play a Hamlet Glutton. Play a Hamlet Glutton. Let's end the game right now. They do not, though. They play a Territorial Witch Stalker, so no ice out, because that doesn't matter too much. Still matters enough to go ahead and try to clear it out so we can get extra damage in with the Red Cap Thief. But they have the Ferocious Werefox to save it, which is fine. Obviously not ideal, not perfect. And things get a little awkward here. We draw into a Hatching Plans, but I can't play that and hold up the ice out because I don't have triple blue. So I'm like, I mean, this Talion's Messenger is just going to kill them all by itself. So I think the game plan is just keep attacking with Talion's Messenger and hold up the ice out forever. Just literally never cast anything else. Just hold on to the ice out. It's only 2 swings till lethal now. And they just pass the turn. And as you can see, I don't decide to flick a coin their face or their 1/1 here, because the only reason that I think would be reasonable for them to just want to pass the turn here is if they're holding up instant speed removal and they want me to like tap out during their end step so they can respond by instant speed removaling the Talion's Messengers. That's why I don't even go for flick a coin value. I'm like, no, I'm just going to have my mana up at literally all times for this ice out. And then luckily I do get the third island for the Hatching Plans ice out combo. So now when I cast the ice out, I can draw 3 as well, and we're in a really good position, putting them down to 4 with our Talion's Messenger. They flick a coin our face, but that's a-okay. They get a treasure token from a Grabby Giant, but that's a-okay. And then they cast the Hilda's Crown of Winter, which is essentially removal for Talion's Messenger. They can keep tapping it every turn, so that we have to counter, which means they have the mana up to play the Grabby Giant to have a chump blocker. But that's it, just a chump blocker. We don't have a way to deal with it, but that's fine. They can chump block here. I actually decided to play the Obira's Attendants pre-combat because at 4 life, 5 is already lethal against them. If I play the Attendants pre-combat, I can put the counter onto the Obira's Attendants, so I have 2 separate flying threats that are both lethal by the time they untap. So, definitely the play there. And we're going to go back to normal speed as we wrap things up. And there's the concession from our opponent. It was 7-2 in the end. We started 1-2 and rallied back 6 wins in a row to get a 7-win run in the third and final attempt at this Wilds of Eldraine Arena Open Day 1 event. So really, really sweet run with this deck. This was my least favorite deck out of all 3 that I built, and I think I played the worst out of all 3 that I built, because it is not a strategy that I am very well versed in, and obviously you have to make so many decisions in these blue-red control decks with so many instants and stuff in the deck. But here is another look at the sealed pool and the deck if you are interested in that. But this was a great, great run all around. A very, very interesting deck, super different from the kind of stuff I love to jam out in the draft environment. But if it's what you opened up that looked powerful, you know, if it's what you opened up, it's what you opened up. And this was the most powerful deck in the sealed pool, in my opinion. I'm sure there was another build or two we could have done that might have been solid as well. But cannot be unhappy with a 7-win run in an Arena Open event to get to that day 2. So one last look at the full deck list, but this deck was a huge, huge, huge overperformer. Really interesting run. And super solid luck throughout. Obviously, some big misplays that didn't pan out too poorly for us was pretty nice. But there's our prizes, 5,000 gems, and the Arena Open Day 2 pass. But that is going to end today's video. As always, I'd like to thank my patrons and YouTube members for their support, as well as you for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more like it, you can always like, comment, and subscribe to tell the YouTube algorithm to send you some more in your recommended feed. If you'd like to catch me live, you can check out the Twitch channel in the link in the description below, where I'm live every Wednesday. And if you'd like to support the channel directly, you can check out the Patreon link in the description below. But other than that, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again tomorrow for the Arena Open Day 2, Draft number 1.